As we're getting close to the end of the quarter, I want to spend the last two lessons on a summary. How did we get to where we're going? And so the summary of taking the blessing home and to work. So let's start back at the beginning with my silly little poem that I'm quite sure you guys are very tired of hearing, and probably were relieved that I have not used that poem in the past several weeks. So here's the point. If you want to sell Jim Jones or Jim Jones buys, you must first see Jim Jones through Jim Jones' eyes. That's important, that we see other people who they are, how they perceive themselves. And then that helps us understand and communicate with them. So let's look at this review and see if we can make sure that we're all on the same page in the importance of each. Let's get started. As a recap, we started this with, if we're going to share the blessing, then we really need to understand how to communicate with each other. So let's look at that. The communication is so important, and we've used the framework of encoding, decoding, and minimizing the noise between each of the individuals, and understand the field of influence or field of experience, so that we fully understood that the communication is not as simple as it sounds. Just saying words doesn't mean people understand it. We have to understand that there's some roadblocks, some obstacles for that, and those are called noise. It could be that the media that we're using does not help relay the information accurately. It could be that your tone or your word choice impedes people understanding your exact meaning. And sometimes people read into what you're saying or writing. And then the words that you use, the terminologies that you use can come from your field of experience, and other people may not share that same experience. All of those things are roadblocks to how you communicate. So let's make sure that we reflect on that and understand the importance of proper communication. Next, we spent some time with our personalities. Now, we spent some time on a self-assessment tool that I found on the internet for DISC and different personality types. Of course, DISC is not exactly a personality assessment, but it helped us understand that each of us have different concepts and traits and values and ways that we approach things, words that we use, the way that we communicate. Each of us are unique, and we primarily fall into four pretty broad groupings. We actually looked a little bit about how the Gospels, the four Gospels, if you look at them, they kind of reflect God communicating to us as each one of these four different personality types, which was really, to me, a fascinating study. But if you don't pay attention to how you communicate as a particular type of personality and how other personalities would perceive that and hear it, then you are contributing to that noise that's in the communication framework. So to help minimize that noise, we need to reflect on who we are as people, how we interact and how we process information, and then find ways to help communicate and bridge that gap between the other type of personalities. So those are important things to consider when we're wanting to share that blessing with others, so that we want to share that blessing with our spouse, our children, and our coworkers. That we discussed was actually the story brand framework. And if you recall, the framework is there's a character who has a problem, who meets a God, who has a plan that helps The individuals choose a plan of action. There's a call to action there. And then the results are either success or failure. And we looked at um, Paul's sermon on Mars Hill as a beautiful example of how that framework was used in Scripture, of how he took that framework and met with people that were not from his field of experience, people that were very different from him. But he was able to first see who they were and acknowledge that how they saw themselves, and then proceeded to share this blessing, share Jesus with them by telling them the story of Jesus using this framework. And it's a beautiful framework, and we've all been trained on using this framework. So I think it's important that we understand this, that we find ways to help apply it when we're sharing the story. It's a neat little thing. So we spent the first 40% of this whole series, or maybe even half of this whole series, on just communication. And we did that because I think it's important that we know how to communicate. If we are the people of the Bible, if we are the people that need to share this blessing with others, then we need to know how. And if we have looked through Scripture and we have seen examples of how God, through Scripture, has found different avenues to present his story to us, and has addressed each of our personality types, and has used the story framework, has used all these things to tell us about him, tell us about his son, and guide us in the way, then we need to understand how the significance of this and make sure that we are using our words, using communication, making sure that we're doing everything that we can to bridge the gaps between our fields of experience and our personality types, and helping people understand the story. That, my friends, is the first part of our review.